She was alone, screaming in labor, calling the man who promised to love her forever. He didn't answer. He was busy, holding another woman's hand. 5 years later, she walked into his office as his boss. The sterile, cold walls of the hospital room couldn't drown out the pounding in Sarah's chest. The pain had been intense for hours now, but it wasn't the labor that gripped her heart the hardest. It was the unanswered calls. Phone ringing. Again. "Pick up, James, please," she whispered to herself, her voice cracking as another wave of pain hit. She had called him 5 times already, each one going straight to voicemail. Tonight wasn't just any night. Tonight their baby was coming, and James, her husband, the father of their child, wasn't there. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the contraction leaving her unable to focus on anything but the hurt surging through her chest. The nurse was shouting instructions, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere. On James. "Where are you? Maybe he's in a meeting," one of her friends had suggested earlier. But Sarah knew better. The cold, sinking feeling in her stomach told her the truth. The truth she hadn't wanted to face. He was with her, the younger woman, the woman who had stolen his attention, his affection, and now his presence in her most vulnerable moment. "I'm here with you, Sarah," her friend Rebecca said, squeezing her hand, but the pain was overwhelming now, and her mind refused to focus on anything except James' betrayal. She could feel the weight of every minute he hadn't answered, and yet there was no apology, no remorse, just him, her replacement, the woman who had become his everything in the time he'd stopped being her everything. And then the baby came, in a rush as if it couldn't wait another second to escape the suffocating silence of her marriage. The cries of the newborn filled the air, sharp and demanding, and yet, for Sarah, it was drowned out by the hollow ache in her chest. As the nurse placed the crying bundle of joy into Sarah's arms, her heart shattered, but she would never let the world see it. Not now, not ever. The tears came, not from the labor, but from the raw, gnawing agony that her husband had chosen another woman over her in the moments she needed him the most. She had fought for him, for them, and now there was only her and their baby. But as Sarah lay there in the quiet, the weight of her loneliness felt heavier than the physical pain. The hospital room, once filled with hope, now only echoed with her grief. She looked down at the tiny face in her arms, her heart both full and empty at once. This baby, her child, would never know the man who had left her behind, and neither would she. But Sarah promised herself one thing in that moment. No matter what, she would rise. This wouldn't define her, and the world would see. She would build her own empire, and no one would ever hurt her like this again. Hours had passed since the birth, and Sarah sat alone in the sterile hospital room, the baby swaddled beside her. The quiet hum of the machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses seemed like a distant memory. Sarah hadn't slept. She hadn't even been able to eat. The only thing she could focus on was the phone that buzzed on the table next to her. Another call from James. Her finger hovered over the screen. Should I answer? She knew what the voice on the other end would say. She'd heard it all before. The excuses, the apologies, the promises that never amounted to anything. But it didn't matter now. There was nothing left to say. He hadn't been here when she needed him most. He hadn't been there when their child was born. And she couldn't imagine ever forgiving him for that. The call went to voicemail. Again. She tossed her phone aside, its cold screen glaring back at her, a symbol of everything he had become to her. Unreachable, distant, a mere shadow of the man she had once loved. The anger that had been building inside her since his betrayal began to fester, but there was no one to blame but herself. She had trusted him. She had believed in their family. "Maybe he's busy," her friend Rebecca had said earlier. "He'll come around." But Sarah knew better. She knew that James had chosen someone else, and while he was living his life with her, Sarah was left to piece together the broke fragments of her own. The weight of the baby in her arms should have felt like a blessing, but instead it only amplified the emptiness that now filled every corner of her heart. The room was too quiet. The baby's soft coos were the only sound, but even those were a reminder of everything Sarah had lost. Outside the window, the world was moving on. Cars honked, people bustled through the hospital halls. Life continued, but for Sarah it felt as if everything had come to a standstill. The silence in the room was deafening. Her mind drifted back to the day she had found out about his affair. It hadn't been the usual signs, no late nights, no suspicious phone calls. It had been a simple text, an accidental slip-up that had shattered her world. She had been in the kitchen when she saw it. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I'm with someone else now. She's younger, more beautiful, and she understands me in ways you never could." The words had stung, but it wasn't the words that hurt the most. It was the image of him with her. The image of him choosing her over Sarah, over their family, over everything they had built. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet, like she had been living in a lie all along. Her world had cracked wide open, and all she could do was watch as the pieces fell apart. But that was then. This was now. Sarah had to focus. She had to keep moving forward. The baby stirred in her arms, and for the first time in hours, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. This child needed her, and she couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. She had a life to rebuild, a new future. And if there was one thing Sarah knew, it was that she wouldn't need James to do it. She didn't need him. She never had. The moment she let that truth sink in, something shifted inside her. She had no idea what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirring of determination. She would rise, and when she did, James would regret the day he ever walked out. It had been 6 months since Sarah had given birth, and her life had become a whirlwind of sleepless nights and relentless days. But what nobody told her was how impossible it would be to stand on her own. The loneliness wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. Her body ached from carrying the weight of everything. She was still nursing the baby, and even when she was exhausted to the point of collapse, she couldn't sleep. No more late-night talks with James, no more sharing in the joy of their baby. The space he had left in their lives had been filled with an emptiness Sarah couldn't quite escape. There were days when she would wake up at 3 a.m., the baby crying softly in the crib beside her, and wonder if she'd ever find her way out of this darkness. She had moved out of their shared apartment, taking what little was left after James had walked away. But it wasn't enough. She struggled to make ends meet. The baby needed new clothes, diapers, formula, and Sarah's savings were running out faster than she had anticipated. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders, and the sting of betrayal was still fresh, like a wound that never fully healed. Sarah had no choice but to swallow her pride. She needed a job. She needed to be self-sufficient. But every place she applied to rejected her. They saw a single mother, not a woman with ambition. They saw the signs of her struggle, her weariness, her vulnerability, and they looked the other way. "Sorry, we're going in another direction," one recruiter had said, barely making eye contact. She could hear the judgment in their voice, feel their disapproval as they glanced at her baby carrier slung on the chair beside her. The rejection hit her harder than she had expected. It was a reminder that despite everything she had been through, the world didn't care. It was still a man's world, and Sarah was barely a blip on the radar. She had spent years focusing on their family, on making sure James was happy, on maintaining a life they had built together. Now, the thought of that life seemed so distant, so irrelevant. It felt as though the world had moved on, and she was still stuck in the past. But Sarah had one thing left. Her willpower. The fire inside her had only been dimmed by the weight of reality. It hadn't been extinguished. She enrolled in online business courses during the late-night hours while the baby slept beside her. Some nights she barely managed to keep her eyes open, but she couldn't afford to be weak. She couldn't afford to let life beat her. When she wasn't studying, she started working part-time at a local boutique. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She was bringing in just enough to get by, just enough to put food on the table and pay for the essentials. It wasn't much, but Sarah had a plan. Slowly, she was going to climb out of this pit, one step at a time. But her nights were still long and lonely. Sometimes she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about James. Did he miss her? Did he regret walking out on their family? She tried not to care, but deep down she knew that part of her would always want him to feel the loss. But Sarah had learned something. She had learned that the only person she could count on now was herself, and every tear, every sleepless night, every rejection only fueled her desire to prove everyone wrong. In the quiet of the night, Sarah promised herself that she would rise. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. And when the time came, James would see the woman she had become, and he would regret ever letting her go. 5 years had passed. Sarah didn't recognize the woman she used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep, waiting for a call from James that never came. The woman she was now walked into boardrooms with her head held high, her confidence radiating in every step. She had rebuilt herself, brick by brick, turning her heartbreak into a source of strength. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The boutique she had started from scratch had blossomed into a small empire. It had started as a little corner shop selling handmade jewelry, but soon Sarah had expanded it into a full-fledged lifestyle brand. Now it wasn't just about clothes and accessories, it was about empowering women, creating a space where they could feel beautiful, confident and strong, just like Sarah had learned to feel. She had learned the art of negotiation, built valuable connections and hired a team that believed in her vision. Slowly but surely she had clawed her way to the top, but as her business grew, so did the pressure. Managing it all, being a mother, a businesswoman and a mentor, was no easy feat. But Sarah was built for this. Every rejection, every sleepless night had sharpened her. She had learned to turn obstacles into opportunities. The woman who once begged James to come home now had hundreds of people asking her for advice, for partnerships, for opportunities. The world was now recognizing her value. One morning, as Sarah sat in her spacious office, sipping coffee and looking over her latest business projections, she caught sight of a headline that made her heart skip a beat. Operation, seeking buyer amidst financial struggles. Could this be your chance? Her eyes narrowed as she read the article. The company James had worked for, his pride and joy, was on the brink of collapse. The news made Sarah's heart race, but not from sympathy. No, it was something else. She felt a familiar pulse of ambition rise in her chest. She'd never planned on getting involved in a corporate acquisition, but this opportunity felt different. It was her chance to take back control, not just over her own life, but over the one thing James had always been so proud of, the one thing he had never let go of. She wasn't going to let him win. She would buy this company and make it her own. But there was one obstacle standing in her way: money. The company wasn't cheap, and despite all her success, she knew it would take everything she had to make the deal happen. Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached out to her financial advisor, making calls and arranging meetings with potential investors. There was no room for fear anymore, only the hunger for what was rightfully hers. And as she sat across the table from these high-powered men and women, she had no doubt in her mind that she could pull this off. It wasn't just about money. It was about power. This was her moment. Sarah was no longer the woman who had been abandoned in a hospital room. She was the woman who had built an empire, and she wasn't going to stop until it was all in her hands. Weeks of negotiations followed, and with each passing day, Sarah's resolve only grew stronger. She knew the deal was risky, but she didn't care. This was more than a business acquisition. It was a statement. She had worked hard for everything she had, and no one was going to take that away from her. Then the moment arrived. The deal was finalized. The company that James had poured his blood, sweat and tears into was now hers. As she stared at the signed contract, a smile curled on her lips. It wasn't just about owning a company. It was about reclaiming her power, her worth, and her future. The next day she walked into her office, her fingers brushing the glossy surface of her desk as the reality of her victory set in. Her phone buzzed, and when she looked at the screen, she saw a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, please, call me. It's urgent. James needs to talk to you." She didn't need to think twice. She pressed ignore. This wasn't about James anymore. It was about Sarah. The mahogany doors to the boardroom opened with a soft creak, but it felt like thunder in James's ears. He walked in, adjusting his tie, expecting the usual quarterly update. But the energy in the room had shifted. It was tense, buzzing with whispers and sideways glances. Executives looked uncomfortable. Some straightened in their seats. Others kept their eyes glued to the table. Something was off. Then he saw her, Sarah, standing tall at the head of the table, poised in a crisp black suit. Her presence sucked the air out of his lungs. Her hair framed her face like a crown, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, cold, sharp, like twin daggers aimed at his pride. His voice cracked. "Cesara?" She didn't even blink. "Mr. Harris," she said, with the icy confidence of a woman who had nothing left to prove. "Take a seat. We're just getting started." James froze. His legs felt like stone. He looked around the room, searching for clarity, for explanation, but every executive avoided his gaze. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "For those of you who haven't heard, I'm the new owner of this company. As of this morning, the acquisition is complete. Effective immediately, I'm stepping in as CEO." A stunned silence followed. James' jaw hung open. "What? How? Why?" Sarah didn't answer right away. She turned to the screen at the front of the room and clicked a remote. Charts, numbers and strategies appeared, all mapped with precision. It was a flawless takeover plan, elegant, ruthless, just like her. "You always underestimated me, James," she said, finally turning to face him. "You left me in that hospital, alone and humiliated. You chose a younger woman and walked away like I didn't matter. You thought I'd disappear. You thought I was done." She took a slow step toward him. "But I rose. I built something from nothing, and now I own everything you once called yours." James looked like a ghost, his face drained of color, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This can't be happening." "Oh, but it is," she said, her voice low and calm. "And I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to lead, to grow this company, but I won't allow any dead weight to hold me back." The door opened behind him. 2 security guards stepped in. Sarah turned to them. "Please, escort Mr. Harris out of the building. He no longer works here." James stumbled back. "You can't do this. I've been here for 15 years. She didn't flinch. "And you left me when I needed you most. This is me returning the favor." As the guards took him by the arms, James struggled to speak, to plead, but Sarah turned her back to him. She had no more words for the man who had abandoned her. He was gone. And she had finally taken back her power. The boardroom doors clicked shut behind James, the echo lingering like a closing chapter. The executive sat frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Sarah stood silently for a moment, not to bask in the power, but to breathe it in. To remember what it felt like to finally be seen, not as someone's wife, but as a force. Her assistant leaned in. "Would you like to continue with the meeting, Ma'am?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, let's move forward. We have work to do." And just like that, she turned back to the presentation, picking up from the exact slide James had walked in on, like his presence had never even mattered. But behind her calm composure, her heart was pounding. Not from fear, from freedom. Later that evening, Sarah stood by the tall glass windows of her office, overlooking the city skyline. The lights blinked like stars, each one a reminder of the nights she cried alone, the times she nearly gave up, the whispers of doubt that used to haunt her. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk. Her son's first birthday. He was the reason. The fire in her lungs, the quiet keep going when everything else screamed quit. There was a soft knock at the door. Rebecca entered, grinning ear to ear. "I watched it all from the conference room TV. You are going viral." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Viral?" Rebecca held up her phone. Someone in the building recorded James being escorted out. It's already on TikTok. Caption says, "CEO serves ice-cold karma to cheating ex-husband. 5 years in the making." There's thousands of comments. They're calling you Queen Energy. Some are begging for your skincare routine. Sarah chuckled softly for the first time in years. "Good. Let them watch." Rebecca sat down. "So, was this all about payback?" Sarah turned back to the window. No. Payback is temporary. This is legacy. A moment of silence passed between them. Then Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a new email. Subject: Final notice. To James Harris. Body: You made your choice 5 years ago. I made mine today. Don't contact me again. My son deserves better than half-hearted apologies and broken men. She hit send without hesitation. Downstairs, as she walked toward the waiting elevator, employees whispered excitedly. Some clapped quietly. One woman mouthed, "You're a legend." Sarah simply smiled. Not because she wanted recognition, but because she knew other women were watching. Women who had been left, abandoned, replaced, silenced. And now they saw what it looked like to rise. As the elevator doors closed, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. James. Sarah, please, just talk to me. I made a mistake. She stared at it, then hit block. No tears, no reply. Just the quiet hum of victory. If you were in Sarah's shoes, would you forgive James and start over? Or walk away like a boss? Let's talk in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you.